The rain fell with a tired sigh, slicking the asphalt paths of the park until they mirrored the bruised purple of the Tokyo sky. It was the kind of evening that bled the color from the world, leaving only shades of gray. My food stall, a small metal box of warmth and spice, felt like the last bastion of life. The scent of grilled chicken and chili oil clung to the damp air, a ghost of the lunchtime rush. I was wiping down the stainless steel counter for the final time when I saw him. He was sitting on a wooden bench under a ginkgo tree, its bare branches clawing at the twilight. He wasn't seeking shelter from the rain. He seemed to have accepted it, become part of it. The water darkened the shoulders of his suit, a garment so exquisitely tailored it looked out of place in this public space of stray cats and laughing children. Even soaked and ruined, the suit spoke of wealth, of a life lived in rooms where the air was conditioned and the silence was expensive. He stared at nothing, his posture a study in defeat. Men like him did not sit on park benches in the rain. They moved through the city in tinted cars, shadows at their shoulders, their presence shifting the gravity of any room they entered. But this man's gravity had collapsed. It was in the slump of his shoulders, the stillness of his hands resting on his knees. His hands were beautiful, long-fingered and clean, but they were empty. Something in his profound loneliness snagged at me. It was a familiar ache. I knew what it was to have the world narrow to the space you occupied, to feel the press of solitude from all sides. I looked at the last 2 skewers of chicken, still warm on the grill, and the container of rice I'd saved for my own dinner. I made a choice. Lifting the food onto a polystyrene plate, I walked out from under the awning of my stall, the cold rain immediately plastering strands of my braids to my cheeks. I stopped in front of him. He didn't look up. His focus was somewhere distant and bleak. "You should eat something." My voice was quiet, nearly lost in the hiss of the rain. He didn't move. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me, or perhaps didn't understand. Then his eyes lifted. They were dark, the color of wet slate, and held a chilling emptiness. A small, almost invisible scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny flaw in an otherwise perfect, severe face. I held out the plate. "It's warm. It'll help." His gaze dropped to the food, then returned to my face. He studied me with an unnerving intensity, as if trying to solve a complex problem. I felt pinned by that look, seen in a way that was both invasive and absolute. Finally, he extended a hand and took the plate. His fingers brushed mine, his skin unexpectedly cold. He didn't say thank you. He just looked at the food, then slowly, deliberately, picked up a piece of chicken with his fingers and ate it. He chewed with a kind of focused precision, as if relearning a forgotten ritual. I was about to turn and leave him to it, to retreat to the sanctuary of my stall, when a car, a black sedan with illegally dark windows, slid to a stop at the curb. It killed its lights, but left the engine running, a low predator's growl. 3 men got out. They wore cheap suits that didn't fit their bulky frames, and they moved with the lazy confidence of bullies who knew the fight was already won. They fanned out, their smirks catching the dim park light. The man on the bench, my silent diner, did not react. He simply took another bite of chicken. Well, the leader said, stopping a few feet away. "Look what the rain washed up. The great Tatsuya. Eating garbage in a park." Tatsuya. The name meant nothing to me, but the way the man said it, dripping with contemptuous satisfaction, told me everything. This was not a friendly visit. Tatsuya slowly finished chewing, his eyes never leaving the man's face. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken history. "Ishikawa sent his dogs to bark?" Tatsuya's voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "He doesn't have the courage to come himself." The leader laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Ishikawa has your territory, your men, your house. He even has your pretty wife warming his bed. Why would he come down here to look at the trash?" The words were meant to be knives, and I saw them land. A muscle jumped in Tatsuya's jaw, a flicker of violent control in the rigid calm of his face. He set the plate down carefully on the bench beside him. "Get out of my sight," he said. The words were not a request. They were an order issued from a throne that no longer existed. The men laughed again. One of them stepped forward and kicked the plate, sending rice and chicken scattering across the wet pavement. "My food. My gift." A hot, sharp spike of anger pierced my fear. I had worked 12 hours for that food. I had given it freely. That was when she made the mistake of looking at me. The leader's eyes slid from the broken man on the bench to me, standing frozen a few feet away. What's this? Did you find a new pet, Tatsuya? Does she feed you from her hand now that you're a beggar? Tatsuya rose to his feet. He didn't do it quickly. He uncoiled, a slow, deliberate movement that was more menacing than any sudden attack. He was taller than I'd realized, his frame lean but powerful beneath the ruined suit. The emptiness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something cold and lethal. She has nothing to do with this, he said. She does now, the man sneered, taking a step toward me. I acted before I thought. My body moved on pure, unthinking instinct. I spun around, ran the few feet back to my stall, and grabbed the small saucepan of oil still sitting on the burner. It was hot, not boiling, but hot enough. Without hesitating, I turned and threw the contents straight at the man advancing on me. He screamed, a high, thin sound of shock and pain as the hot oil hit his face and chest. That scream broke the tableau. The other two men rushed forward, but their focus was split. Tatsuya moved in the space that scream created. He was a blur of motion, economical and brutal. He disarmed one man, breaking his wrist with a sickening crack, and used the man's own body as a shield against the other. It was over in seconds. One man was on the ground, clutching his ruined face. The other two were backing away, their arrogance shattered, replaced by the primal fear of a predator they had foolishly mistaken for prey. Tatsuya stood breathing evenly in the rain, his knuckles bleeding. He looked at the groaning man, then at his retreating soldiers, and finally, his gaze landed on me. The coldness in his eyes was different now. It was assessing, calculating. He walked over to me, his steps silent on the wet ground. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could feel the heat coming off his body. I could smell the rain on his wool suit, mingled with a faint, clean scent of cedar. You should not have done that, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of gratitude. He was coming for me, I said, my own voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. The hot pan was still in my hand, its handle digging into my palm. They will not forget your face, he stated, a simple fact. You cannot stay here. You can't go home. The reality of his words crashed down on me. The park, my stall, my tiny apartment a few blocks away, my entire life was contained within a 10-block radius. A life I had built myself, skewer by skewer. What are you talking about? I whispered. He didn't answer. He simply took my arm, his grip firm but not painful. We are leaving. He led me away from the warm light of my stall, from the scattered remains of my food on the pavement, and into the deepening shadows of the city. I didn't know his name, not really. I didn't know where we were going. I only knew that the simple act of offering a plate of food to a sad man on a bench had just cost me everything. That was the moment my world ended and his began. The apartment was small, anonymous, and smelled of dust and disuse. It was on the top floor of a rundown building in a neighborhood where people learned not to ask questions. There was a mattress on the floor, a small table with 2 chairs, and nothing else. No art on the walls, no books, no sign that a life was lived here. It was a place to hide, not to live. This was the wreckage of his empire. He released my arm the moment the door clicked shut behind us. The sound was unnervingly final. He moved to the single window, peering through the grimy glass at the rain-slicked street below. He moved like the room owed him space, even this tiny one. My name is Amina, I said to his back. It felt important to name myself, to hold on to that one piece of identity. He turned from the window. The dim light from the street cast half of his face in shadow, accentuating the sharp line of his jaw. Tatsuya. Those men, they work for someone named Ishikawa. He leads the clan that was once my rival, Tatsuya said, his voice clipped. Now he leads my clan as well. Betrayal. The word hung unspoken in the air. It explained the suit, the emptiness, the bench in the rain. He was a king in exile. And your wife? The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was too personal, too invasive, but the man's taunt had been so cruel. Tatsuya's expression shuddered. For a long moment, he said nothing. He walked over to a worn duffel bag in the corner, the only piece of luggage in the room. He unzipped it and pulled out a small first aid kit. She made a choice, he said, his back still to me. She chose the winner. His wound was not a scar or a bullet hole. It was shame. The profound shame of being abandoned when he was at his weakest, of his loyalty being treated as a commodity with a price tag. The woman he was supposed to protect, the one who had sworn an oath to him, had left him for the man who destroyed him. He turned, holding a tube of antiseptic cream and a bandage. He gestured to my hand, the one that had held the hot pan. I hadn't even realized I'd burned myself on the edge of it. A thin red line welted my skin. "Give it to me," he commanded. I hesitated, then held out my hand. He took it, his cold fingers wrapping around my wrist. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the burn. He was methodical, his movements precise and economical, just like his violence in the park. He was so close I could see the individual threads in the fabric of his white shirt, the faint shadow of ink, a dragon's tail, peeking from beneath his cuff. His focus was entirely on my hand, his head bowed. The silence between us was not empty. It was filled with the hiss of the rain against the window, the soft sound of my own breathing, the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was now unchangeable. I watched the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the slight furrow of his brow as he concentrated. I told myself it was survival instinct, this intense observation. I needed to understand the man who now held my life in his hands. But it was a lie. I was noticing things I had no business noticing. He finished wrapping the bandage, his fingers lingering on my wrist for a fraction of a second too long. That is when she made the mistake of looking up. His dark eyes met mine, and the air crackled. The professional distance he had maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and searching. It was the first time he had looked at me not as a problem to be managed, but as a person. As a woman. The spell was broken by a sharp rap on the door. Tatsuya dropped my hand and was moving before the second knock, a gun appearing in his hand as if from thin air. He flattened himself against the wall beside the door, motioning for me to be silent. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had they found us already? "It is Kyo," a voice called from the other side, low and urgent. Tatsuya relaxed fractionally, but he didn't lower the gun. He opened the door a crack, then wider to admit a young man with sharp eyes and a worried expression. Kyo's gaze flickered to me, then back to Tatsuya, his bow quick and formal. "They are looking for you," Kyo said, his voice tight. "But that is not the worst of it. Ishikawa knows a woman was involved. He is furious. He thinks she was with you, a new replacement." Kyo stumbled over the word. "He has put a price on both your heads. His men are showing a sketch of her to every vendor in that park." The floor dropped out from under me. It wasn't just that I couldn't go home. Now my face was being passed around the Tokyo underworld. I was no longer a civilian who got caught in the crossfire. I was a target. A named accomplice. I looked at Tatsuya. This was his world, his war. I had every right to run, to try and disappear on my own. I could walk out that door and take my chances. But as I looked at the grim set of his jaw, the weary resolve in his eyes, I knew I wouldn't. Running felt like leaving a fellow soldier on the battlefield. I had thrown the first blow in my own way. I had chosen a side the moment I'd thrown that oil. "What do we do?" I asked. The word "we" hung in the air, a deliberate choice. Tatsuya looked from Kyo to me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected me to panic, to demand he let me go. He hadn't expected me to enlist. "We disappear," Tatsuya said. "And then we fight back." Our escape was a frantic blur through the city's underbelly. Kyo drove us in a nondescript delivery van, navigating back alleys and industrial districts that never appeared on tourist maps. We ended up in a warehouse by the docks, the air thick with the smell of salt and diesel. It was supposed to be a temporary safe house. It became a trap. They came at dawn. 2 black cars, blocking the only exit. Ishikawa's men. They moved with a chilling efficiency that told me these were not the same street thugs from the park. These were his elite soldiers. "Stay behind me," Tatsuya ordered, pushing me toward a stack of crates. His voice was calm, but his body was coiled tight as a spring. Kyo stood at his side, 2 guns in his hands, his young face pale but determined. The first bullets ripped through the thin metal wall of the warehouse, and the world dissolved into chaos and noise. I crouched behind the crates, my hands over my ears, the percussive blasts of gunfire vibrating through the concrete floor. Tatsuya moved through the violence like it was choreography he had known his whole life. He was never panicked, only precise. Every shot was aimed, every movement had a purpose. He and Kyo were impossibly outnumbered, a fact that became terrifyingly clear when Kyo cried out and fell, clutching a leg dark with blood. Tatsuya didn't hesitate. He laid down covering fire, dragging Kyo behind a more solid piece of machinery. But now he was alone. 1 man against 8. The odds were impossible. One of Ishikawa's men broke from cover, trying to get a better angle. His path took him past my hiding spot. He was focused on Tatsuya, his rifle raised. He didn't see me. My mind went strangely quiet. I saw the layout of the warehouse, the heavy chain hoist hanging from a rusty girder above him. I saw the release lever, just a few feet from my hand. It was greasy and dark. I didn't think. I scrambled up the crates, my fingers finding the cold metal of the lever. With all my strength, I pulled it down. The chain dropped with a deafening screech of metal on metal, the huge hook swinging down like a pendulum. It caught the soldier in the chest, sending him flying backward into a stack of pallets. He didn't get up. The distraction, however brief, was all Tatsuya needed. He eliminated 2 more men in a rapid, brutal succession. But as he moved, another gunman appeared on a catwalk above, his rifle aimed directly at Tatsuya's unprotected back. "Tatsuya!" I screamed. He turned, but it was too late. I did the only thing I could. I ran out from my cover, straight into the line of fire. It was a stupid, selfless, insane act. Tatsuya's eyes widened in horror. He lunged, tackling me to the ground, his body covering mine an instant before a spray of bullets chewed up the concrete where I had been standing. I felt the impact as one of the bullets grazed him, a sharp, violent shudder that ran through his whole body. He grunted in pain, his weight pressing me into the hard floor. For a moment, the world was just the smell of gunpowder, the rough texture of his coat against my cheek, and the thundering of his heart against my own. He had shielded me. He had taken a bullet meant for me. The remaining men, their nerve broken, retreated. In the ringing silence that followed, Tatsuya rolled off me, his arm dripping blood. I pushed myself up, my hands shaking. "You are a fool," he rasped, his face tight with pain and something else. Something that looked terrifyingly like fear. "You're hurt," I said, ignoring his words. I tore a strip of fabric from my own shirt and pressed it against the wound on his bicep. It was a deep graze, bleeding freely. We got Kyo and Tatsuya into the van and I drove, my hands slick with their blood on the steering wheel. I took them to the only place I could think of, a place no one would ever look for a fallen Yakuza boss, the storage unit where I kept the off-season supplies for my food stall. It was small, cramped, and anonymous. There, by the light of a single battery-powered lantern, I stitched Tatsuya's arm. I wasn't a doctor, but I'd learned to sew, and the principle was the same. My hands were steady. He sat on a stack of folded awnings, watching me, his face pale, but his eyes sharp. He never flinched. "You should have let them shoot me," he said, his voice low. "Don't be stupid," I retorted, pulling a stitch tight. "You'd be no good to me, Dad." He was silent for a long time, watching the methodical work of my hands. The air in the small space was thick with the scent of antiseptic and blood. When I finished, our faces were only inches apart. His eyes searched mine, the cold, hard mask stripped away, leaving only a raw vulnerability. "No one has ever done that," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No one has ever stood in front of me." He reached up with his good hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was electric, a spark in the darkness. I didn't pull away. "Your courage is a liability," he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. "It makes me careless." That was his confession. Not of love, but of something far more dangerous. He was admitting I had breached his defenses, that my safety had become a factor in his tactical calculations. For a man like him, That was a fatal weakness. And for me, it was an irreversible claim. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, a collision of two people who had seen death and chosen each other instead. It was the taste of gunpowder and rain, a promise made in the dark, sealed in blood. When we broke apart, we were both breathless. The line had been crossed. We stayed hidden for a week, nursing our wounds and planning our next move. Kyo, his leg bandaged, acted as our scout. The news he brought back was grim. Ishikawa, enraged by our escape, had doubled the bounty. And he'd made it personal. He'd plastered my face on posters all over my old neighborhood, not as a wanted accomplice, but as a common thief who had stolen from local businesses. He was systematically destroying my name, my life, ensuring I had nothing to go back to. He was isolating me, trying to make me a weakness Tatsuya would be forced to abandon. Ishikawa didn't understand. His actions didn't make me a liability. They made me a weapon. He's using my world against me, I said, looking at the grainy photo of my own face on a flyer Kyo had brought back. So I'll use my world against him. Tatsuya looked at me, his expression unreadable. What are you thinking? Ishikawa is expecting a Yakuza war, I explained, the plan forming in my mind, born from years of observing the rhythms of the street. He's thinking about guns and soldiers and territory. He's not thinking about a girl who sold chicken skewers in a park. He's not thinking about the city he doesn't see. I laid it all out. A trap. Not in a warehouse or a dockyard, but in the abandoned underground market beneath the old train station. A place I knew because other vendors used to talk about it, a labyrinth of forgotten stalls and crumbling concrete. A place with one way in and a dozen ways to seal it. I would be the bait. Tatsuya refused. It was absolute. I will not use you as a shield. You won't be, I argued, my voice fierce. You're not seeing the whole board. This isn't about hiding me. This is about me luring him onto my territory. He thinks he took your empire? Fine. I'm inviting him into mine. And in my empire, I make the rules. He saw the unshakable certainty in my eyes. He saw that I was no longer the woman he had found on a park bench. The violence of his world had not broken me, it had forged me into something new. Reluctantly, he agreed. The night of the trap was cold and clear. I walked into the mouth of the underground market alone, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I was terrified, but a strange calm settled over me. This was my choice, my move. I was not being rescued. Ishikawa came, just as I knew he would. He brought only his most trusted men, too arrogant to believe it was anything but a simple execution. He found me standing in the center of the market's main concourse, illuminated by a single, bare bulb we'd wired to a car battery. The little stray, he sneered. Come to beg for your life. No, I said, my voice steady. I came to watch you lose. That was Tatsuya's cue. He and Kyo emerged from the shadows, sealing the entrance behind them with a heavy iron gate. The trap was sprung. Ishikawa's men opened fire, but the crumbling stalls and concrete pillars gave Tatsuya the cover he needed. The fight was brutal and close quarters. But this time, I wasn't a bystander. While they fought, I made my way through the darkened tunnels to the secondary support pillar I'd identified earlier, a pouch of flammable chemicals Kyo had acquired strapped to my side. I secured the charge, my fingers numb with cold and fear. As I was lighting the fuse, one of Ishikawa's men found me. He grabbed me, his arm a steel band around my throat, a knife pressing against my skin. Drop it, boss, he yelled out into the main concourse. Or the girl dies. The gunfire stopped. I could feel the man's sweat, smell his fear. Tatsuya stepped out from behind a pillar, his gun lowered. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were locked on me. They were filled with a terrible, agonizing choice. Let her go, Ishikawa, Tatsuya said, his voice dangerously soft. This is between us. There is no us anymore, Ishikawa laughed. There is only me. And everything that was yours is now mine. Including her. I met Tatsuya's eyes across the cavernous space. I saw the conflict, the calculus of his position. He couldn't save me without sacrificing himself. So I made the choice for him. With a surge of adrenaline, I stomped down hard on the gunman's instep and drove my elbow back into his ribs. He grunted, his grip loosening for a split second. It was all I needed. I twisted free, diving to the ground as I threw the lit fuse onto the pouch of chemicals. The explosion was a deafening roar, not big enough to bring the ceiling down, but more than enough to shatter the pillar and send a shower of concrete and dust everywhere. It was the ultimate distraction. In the chaos, Tatsuya moved. He wasn't aiming for Ishikawa's men. He was aiming for Ishikawa. The final confrontation was swift, brutal, and ended with a silence that was heavier than any explosion. When the dust settled, Tatsuya was standing over Ishikawa's body. He was bruised and bleeding, but he was standing. His empire was gone, his clan was shattered, but he had won the war. He walked over to me, ignoring everyone and everything else. He knelt, his hands framing my face, his thumbs wiping away the grime. He searched my eyes, looking for something. "Amina," he said, and the way he spoke my name was different. It held the weight of an oath. It was acclaiming. "My clan is ash. My fortune is gone. I have nothing left to offer a woman." "You're wrong," I said, my voice hoarse. I placed my hand over his on my cheek. "You have me." A cost had been paid. My old life was gone forever. I could never go back to the park, to the simple warmth of my stall. I had stitched a man's wounds, planned a war, and served as the bait in a trap that had left men dead. The woman I had been was a ghost. Later, we stood on the roof of that same anonymous apartment building, looking out over the glittering expanse of Tokyo. The city hummed with a life that felt a million miles away. He was not the king he had once been, and I was not the innocent woman who had offered him food. We were something new, forged together in violence and rain. He did not promise me safety or riches. He did not speak of love. He simply stood beside me, a silent, solid presence in the vastness of the night. He reached out and placed his hand over mine where it rested on the cold metal railing. His touch was a statement, an anchor. It was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of an empire built for two.